Welcome to this edition of the Foundation for Free Enterprise Education Speaker Series. My name is Scott Lee, and today I'm very pleased to have with me a great friend of the Foundation, Mr. John Lafferty. John is President and CEO of CellMyLight Incorporated, located in Chester County. John's a fascinating guy, and in today's edition, we're going to take you on an exploration of entrepreneurship, perseverance, determination, as we discover some tips on how to start with an idea in your head and finish by taking an actual product to market. We're also going to explore the challenges and opportunities of selling a product globally. But before we begin, a little bit about John. He's a graduate of Malvern Preparatory School, we won't say when, and he holds a BS degree in Business Administration from Drexel University and a Master's in Organizational Leadership from Cabrini University. He sits on several boards, including Cabrini University, the African American Youth Leadership Foundation, and the Light of Marnie. He's a part-time business teacher at Archbishop Carroll High School, and he's an adjunct professor of finance at Immaculata University. He's been CEO of CellMyLight for the past 8 years, and he volunteers his time teaching entrepreneurship to students from Chester County all the way to Liberia and Zimbabwe. Over the last 10 years, he's trained over 4,000 people and 300 churches in safe sanctuaries. He is also a part-time Methodist minister, filling in for area pastors whenever needed. He's been married to his wife, Jennifer, for 15 years, and in his spare time, which is very rare, trust me, he enjoys chess and golf. So sit back, relax, and come along as we explore the fascinating topic of global entrepreneurship. So John, welcome. Great to see you.
You too, Scott.
Well, so tell us how you came up with the idea for CellMyLight.
Well, tell you what happened was I was in a family business for almost 30 years, and due to some unfortunate situations of my father and a couple cousins and an uncle dying, I ended up leaving the business, and I wanted to go into some type of other manufacturing area. So I had some time on my hands, and my wife and myself went over to West Africa to do some missionary work. And while we're over in West Africa, we're in the history of West Africa, both Liberia, Ghana, Sierra Leone, they went through a horrific civil war back in the 90s and early 2000. And as a result of that civil war, the country was devastated as far as their entire infrastructure was ruined. The rebels basically tore off all the electrical wire and telephone wire from telephone poles to sell it for scrap metal so they could buy guns to fight the government and so forth. They also, basically, as a result of this civil war, they really didn't have anything. A lot of the industries were ruined and so forth. So when my wife and myself went over there in the late 2000, around 2008, 2009, there was nothing there. It was basically an impoverished country, third world country, no infrastructure and so forth. And one of the things that I discovered when I was over there was a lot of people had what I call disposable cell phones, something that you would see at like a major store, like say a Walmart or a Target, or even your local gas station. They were very cheap phones, maybe $20, $30 phones. And as opposed to in the US where you buy a cell phone plan, over in West Africa and also even in Southeast Asia, they buy these phone cards, and these phone cards are just loaded with minutes. So a $5 phone card might give you, for example, 100 minutes, a lot more than it would in the U.S. So basically, they have these disposable cell phones. But the problem is when the battery goes dead on the cell phone, a lot of these people don't have an opportunity for a regular wall outlet. So they have to literally walk sometimes 20 miles one way from a village into a major city. And it's almost, Scott, like you would see at like a grocery store where you go up to lunch meat counter and you get a ticket. Well, people walk their cell phones up to these outlets and they get a ticket and they drop their cell phone off to be charged, and then they pick it up in a couple hours. Well, as a result of that, the standard wage in West Africa is usually about $7 to $10 a week. It can cost as much as $1.50 to $2 to get your cell phone recharged. So what I did was take notice of this. Well, when I came back from the mission trip, I was at like a kind of like a tech show where a lot of people have different gadgets and so forth. And I saw somebody that had something that could basically put a charge to a battery through a solar cell, and then able to recharge things such as a flashlight or something like that. So what I did was I talked to the manufacturer and kind of like drew it out on a napkin. I said, is there any way that you could kind of like come up with something like this? And they did. Well, what happened was I sent over about 50 of them, prototypes, over to Africa. And they basically, what happened was I sent them to a village. I didn't send them into a main city in one of the West African countries. And what happened was the people in the village actually started to become entrepreneurs. They were using the flashlights at night so they could actually read in their huts, so the kids could actually get an education and read their textbooks. And then during the day, they would use, now West Africa is right on the equator. So what normally might take, say, 8 hours to charge a cell, it was only taking, say, 2.5 hours right at the equator to charge a cell. So what happened was they would charge their cell phone, and then once they charged their cell phone, they would go over and charge their neighbor's cell phone and charge a fee. So that's how I got my company's name, CellMyLight. It's my actual company's name is CellMy, and then Light, Light. But I got it the play off of the entrepreneur name that they were selling their light for a recharge. So there was a lot of benefits of it from the standpoint that A, they didn't have to walk 20 miles one way to go get their phone charged. Number two is they could make a little bit of money, and their neighbors were gladly to pay the same price that they would have had to pay if they had to walk 20 miles. But a main important thing is almost an environmental aspect. West Africa does not have any sanitation program in their country. So once somebody uses up a battery, they just throw it in the street like a cigarette butt, or they throw it in a stream, or they even throw it in the ocean for disposal. So one of the reasons why I wanted to get the product was not only that it would satisfy light for reading for the children at night, recharging their cell phone, but also the environmental aspect of it, that they weren't polluting their streams and so forth. So that's how CellMyLight was born. From West Africa, we actually moved into Eastern Africa, and one of the main reasons why we did that is most of Africa is a lot other than, say, South Africa or even, say, Egypt. Most of Africa, the continent, is actually a lot of third world countries that need a product like this.
I don't think we as Americans, John, have a concept of that. I mean, basically what you've just covered is the fact that, first of all, there's no electricity in many of these villages. Second of all, to walk 20 miles just to charge a cell phone, and then they charge you over a day's wage in order to do that. We have no concept of that as Americans.
Exactly.
We are incredibly lucky. So basically you took this idea, you saw a need, and you saw an opportunity to help people. Was that your first motivation, was to help people?
Exactly. Somebody once told me in business that if you constantly have money as your basically your goal, if you just constantly have your eyes on money, you're going to be blind in both eyes, because mostly everybody you have ever read about, talk about, heard interviews on, even somebody like Bill Gates, his whole drive was for communication. It wasn't actually to build all these computer systems. The next thing you know, he's got computers and cars and everything else. And that was kind of how I looked at this, was the fact that I really wanted to help these people in these villages get ahead in life, and also solve a lot of other problems. When you don't have infrastructure for electricity, you're basically, you rely on solar and gas-fired generators. So the fact that even solar electricity in some of these African countries, and even Southeast Asia countries like Cambodia and Vietnam, some parts of Vietnam and so forth, they have such a great need for an electrical infrastructure that it really solved that problem as well.
That's awesome. So you touched on something earlier, and I want to go back to it. You said
Sure.
that basically you came home from your mission trip and you went to a trade show and you saw like a bunch of gadgets and stuff like that, and you basically sketched this thing out on a napkin.
Correct.
So I wanna talk a little bit about how you just began to do this and who were the people that helped you along this way. Now, my father was also an entrepreneur, and he said the three most important relationships you'll ever have in business are your accountant, your lawyer, and your banker, and not necessarily in that order, depending on your need. So I'm assuming you would have had to have all three of those type folks, maybe an angel investor, a product engineer, all these kinds of things. Walk us through how you actually got started from that sketch on that napkin to actually building the product.
Okay. One of the greatest tools that I could share with any young entrepreneur is when you get in the avenue of a product that you want to bring to market, you want to make sure that nobody else has actually done it before, that you're not imposing on any patents. And patent attorneys can be extremely expensive, especially for a startup business and, in your age group as well. One of the biggest tools that somebody turned me on to in the beginning was something called Google Patent Search. And that was a vehicle that helped me tremendously. It probably saved about 80% off of my patent cost, because I basically could walk into a patent attorney's office and said, here, file a U.S. patent for this. I pretty much have all my research done. And that was simply by using one simple tool. And I would share with any entrepreneur to do that, because it just saves an enormous amount of time. The other piece of advice that I could give to anybody who wants to bring a product to market is start up front with, you were saying as far as an angel investor, start up front as early in the process as you can with a manufacturer. If you can isolate who do you think would be manufacturing your product, and start with that company to maybe absorb some of your startup costs, that helped me out tremendously, because I would have been millions of dollars in debt if I didn't do that from the start. So trying to identify a manufacturer that makes similar to products to what you're inventing, and then go to that manufacturer and say, listen, I'll share the startup costs with you, but it's silly for me to put thousands and thousands of dollars into engineering and design, and then go to a manufacturer and then them change it so they can manufacture it.
Well, I think that's great advice. I mean, first of all, you're not an engineer, you're an entrepreneur, and you have, marketing background and all these kinds of things. And certainly entrepreneurship is your thing. So why try to reinvent the wheel? That's a very important lesson for, I think, all of our viewers here, is that you actually collaborate with people who don't have your level of expertise in order to do that. And
correct. That's
I
a great
think
point.
What you're saying, I think, is that there are many people out there just willing to help a person who really has a great idea and who wants to take it to the next step. There's help out there. It's available.
Exactly.
So you said that you manufacture. Is this product manufactured in the United States?
The product is manufactured overseas now. It started out actually in the U.S. Okay. And one of the things that anybody starting out with a product in the U.S., I had a kind of a market niche, and that market niche was government. I found a woman-owned veteran business that actually manufactured the product for me. The person was a woman who was in special ops in Iraq, and she actually got me into a lot of the military bases. So I was in a lot of military shows, applications, and so forth. And the light was actually used in South Sudan for the opposition to fight, for our side, of course, the U.S. side. But they needed, anybody in the military will tell you, they need basically guns, ammo, and batteries. So the fact that the light could basically, just be solar charged, and nobody have to take batteries in their military backpacks and to-go packs and so forth, it was a huge savings.
That's great.
Yeah.
So when you have the product manufactured, tell us a little bit about how the distribution is taking place. And you said initially that you took your prototypes directly to the villages. How is the product marketed now? Is it marketed?
Well, let me say this much. When it was first manufactured, it was manufactured in the States, and it was sold in the States too.
Okay.
What happened was a lot of the distribution costs, I won't name names because they're pretty big players, but you can imagine who it is. There's a lot of what I call fat in those distribution costs, where something might be 28% of your profit gets eaten up just going with some of these larger distributing companies. Okay. So I was basically getting eaten alive manufacturing it in the States and trying to get it to the regular consumer.
Sure.
The other thing that I was up against was there was a lot of knockoffs that started to come in this country of my product. And one of the things that's very important for even a teenager to know about patents is simply that the patent protects you for your intellectual property rights in the country that you have the patent with. So stuff coming in from China, say, for example, or Indonesia, I would have to have an individual patent for each of those individual countries. Once the knockoffs start coming in from those countries, I mean counterfeits. Once the counterfeits start coming in from those countries, if I go to sue that company, I actually have to go to that country to sue them, and there's no guarantee that I'll win. So the international attorney fees for patents and so forth so I got to the point where this product really started to come over here on counterfeit, and I switched it mostly to Southeast Asia and Africa, and so far I haven't had a problem with it.
Oh, that's great news. That's a big time insight into how, not only patents work, but just the different government players that are at work here. And we're so used to our judicial system and our legal system and things, we oftentimes don't have any concept of how it works. But you struck on a term that I think is very important for young people to know, and that's intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And just touch on the importance of protecting something that you create.
Well, it's extremely important. I'll give you an example. When I was manufacturing this flashlight, I had a lot of electrical engineering and mechanical engineering because of the type of product as it is. Well, through the electrical engineering process, we discovered that I could get a patent on something that's used in solar cells for houses and so forth, of battery tech, where it would actually take the technology that I have for the flashlight, take the solar power, and actually put it to use in battery storage. And it was never actually invented yet. So through the process, I actually got additional patents on that, which at any time, if somebody needs to improve something on a solar panel, they can buy that patent from me. So that was something that I really learned. And the fact that when they say intellectual property, surprisingly, something very similar to my product was invented by a mechanical engineering graduate professor in China, but he never did anything with the product. So it was not unique to CellMyLight, but it actually was something that, by my product being slightly different and have some slightly different features and so forth, I could file a separate patent for it.
Got it.
I don't know if that strictly answered your question, Scott.
No, it really did. Yeah, it did. So I have an interesting question for you.
Sure.
Did your education lead you to entrepreneurship, or did your entrepreneurship lead you to your education?
I would say that I've always been an entrepreneur, even as a teenager. I used to have a seafood business when I was a teenager down in Long Beach Island, New Jersey. And my grandmothers and my neighbors and everything else, they kind of at first thought I was like this little kid selling crabs and clams from almost like a John's lemonade stand. But they actually, one day, somebody stopped by, and next thing you know, I got a contract for a local restaurant. And then he started to tell his friends, and it was basically word of mouth. But it all comes down to service. I don't care what good product that you have. If you're not going to service your industry, you're going to die. But I would say, as far as education goes, I had a sound education. But most entrepreneurs I meet, they're not all engineers. Some have real sound liberal arts degrees. They just have an idea, and they're willing to work to get it to market.
That's fantastic. So what is the first thing you would say to a high school student, or anybody for that matter, who has a great idea for a product and has no idea where to start? I know we've covered some of this, but if they asked you just that one question, what would you tell them?
I would tell them first is probably go to their local chamber of commerce maybe and just see, there might be a lot of times there might be a manufacturer that, I don't know, if I'm a teenager and I want a piece of jewelry I want to make, say, for example, okay, there might not be a manufacturer in my county that makes jewelry, but they might make metal products very, very similar to the product that I want to bring to market. And once they see what I want to do, they might say, well, we make another product for this company that's very similar to that. The next time we run it, so it doesn't cost you a lot of money, why don't you let us make 50 of them for this price or whatever, and let us make them for it. I found a lot of times that you don't know unless you ask.
Yeah.
And a lot of times your local chamber might be a wonderful opportunity, especially for a young person, that they can actually ask for help.
That's fantastic advice. No, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So let's pivot a little bit.
Sure.
Let's talk about you a little bit. Why do you get out of bed every day? What motivates you, man? What's your thing?
One of the things that motivates me is I love helping people by nature. And one of the things that I've done over, as you're well aware with PFEW, I love helping teenagers, and I worked a lot of years junior achievement in Chester County, teaching business and entrepreneurship and career development for high school sophomores, juniors, and seniors. I also teach part-time at Archbishop Carroll in Radnor, Pennsylvania, and I just love I love coaching and teaching, really, and another aspect that I really enjoy is I do a lot of video teaching, both to West Africa as well as in the Southeast Africa and Zimbabwe. And to hear some of these stories, Scott, some of these girls I teach are high school girls that are like 14, 15 years old. They've left their marriage. They were married at 12. And to hear these girls just want to like absorb whatever I say with a sponge in their mind and know that there is a possibility to get out of poverty. And that's one of the things that I really, it just really pulls at my heart. And that is that a lot of these African as well as Southeast Asian countries, there's individuals that they just want to learn. They know that to get out of poverty, it will take education. And by having education, there is a possibility in future for them. And that's what really excites me.
That's great. That is great. So give me an example of a big mistake you made in your life, and how did you learn from it, and how did you fix it, or, whatever, in your career,
I would say probably not getting involved earlier with players, like in other words, not networking quick enough into the game. Because like one of the things that I really learned with bringing this light to market is it is so much easier to have somebody not solve your problems, but if they have more expertise in an area, to basically to help you through it. It's more of a reaching your learning curve per se quicker than basically once an entrepreneur has an ego and they say I know everything and I can handle this myself and everything else, that's probably the biggest mistakes. The biggest advice I could get, and I see this a lot in people that have been very successful, where they're very authentic. They're like, hey, I don't know how to do this. I will take your help. I will take your help on this.
So it sounds like take a daily dose of humble pie, perhaps.
Pretty
Slice
much,
of
pretty much,
humble pie every day.
pretty much.
That's excellent advice for all of us, believe me. So as we wrap up here, John, what advice would you give to students who are interested in entrepreneurship? What should they study? What skills should they learn? What relationships should they begin developing? Why should they go to PFEW? Whatever it is, what advice would you give to these students who are really jazzed by the entrepreneurial experience?
I would say, based on my experience with PFEW, Scott, as well as dealing a lot with teenagers, is communication, communication, and communication. The reason why I say that is I teach finance and I teach accounting to high school sophomores and juniors and so forth. And usually my first day of class, I show them that MIT studied engineering vice presidents for like the last 35 years. And I draw on a board that all the skills that you would think of an engineer, thermodynamics, chemistry, physics, the whole nine yards, all those are skills. And everybody that's going for an engineering degree says, you know what, if I'm going to be successful as an engineer, I got to have these skills. But what MIT did is they looked at all those skills, and then on the other side, they drew communication, writing, delegation. All those things were critical for anybody moving up the corporate ladder in engineering, like to be a vice president of engineering for, say, an IBM or Hewlett Packard or any of those organizations. So what I try to get through as far as the students is no matter how many technical skills I can teach you, the skills that you really need to know in life is to how to communicate to your fellow person.
That is awesome advice, man. Thank you. I think a lot of times, and it happened with my son, I'm going to come clean. I mean, he was a very smart kid, computer engineering, all that kind of stuff, did not like it. And it's all about those interpersonal skills. It's not necessarily about the technical skills. It's about how you can communicate, how you can look a person in the eye, how you can shake their hand, how you can get your point across, how you can listen. I think that's an oft forgotten skill.
Exactly.
So fantastic advice, John. All right, last question, and then we'll wrap it up here. Who was your greatest mentor, and what did they bring to you?
Greatest mentor I ever had was, and he's still a friend of mine today, and it's actually a funny story. He's a blind person. He's been blind since the age of 20. He's probably in his 70s now. And when I met him, he owned a video store. And he was very, very successful. It was when video stores were real popular, like the Blockbusters and so forth.
Wait. A blind guy owning a video store.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
That is awesome.
Actually, him and his wife are blind, and they both of them, they own this video store, and they're very, very successful. This is before even Blockbuster was like a national chain. And they had a whole basically area of Delaware County, Pennsylvania, of video stores that they owned. And just talking to them, like the first thing came to my mind was, that they had this physical handicap. Like, why would you pick a video store? And he said to me, why not? And very, very successful. And we've actually been good friends for over 30 years now. And he's always basically has kept my ego in check. Whenever I think that I'm getting ahead of myself, I'll say, you know what, let's step back. Let's look at this. Are you happy? That's all he says to me is, are you happy, John? Are you being fulfilled? Are you happy? And if you're not, well, do something else in life.
Awesome advice, John. Listen, man, I could talk to you all day on this. I could make 20 videos like this, but thank you so much for everything you do, not only for our foundation, for PFEW, but honestly, for the thousands of people that you've mentored, and quite honestly, the tens of thousands of people you've helped with your product. What a great story. I can't thank you enough for bringing this to us. Any other final comments, John, before we close her up here?
I want to always throw an advertisement. I'm always honored to be associated with Pennsylvania Free Enterprise and the Pennsylvania Free Enterprise Foundation. And my honest regret in life is I didn't do something like this when I was a teenager, because wow. I've seen children are actually not children. I've seen teenagers that have gone through this program that basically were not sure of themselves entering the week and have left the week basically stars and made friends for life.
Perfect way to end it. John, thank you for being our friend. Thank you so much for everything you've brought to us today. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with John to learn more about entrepreneurship or anything we discussed today, his contact information will appear after this video. John, thanks so much. Be well.
Thank you, Scott.